In this video, I challenged myself to build a Hollywood explosion in 1 minute, 1 hour, and 1 day. So let's start with the 1 minute explosion. Now, with only 1 minute, I really only had time to make the most basic explosion setup possible in Houdini. So I quickly put it together and then brought it right into Blender to give it a material where I would then render it out. And after just 1 minute of work, here is the final 1 minute explosion. Now for the 1 hour explosion. So I know that 1 hour gave me a lot more freedom to make something cooler, so I took inspiration from this Harry Potter scene, and I wanted to use my magical wand to lift a knight into the air until he explodes. For this shot, I used two different angles. The first one being from here, where I could just 2D track a giant glowing cylinder onto my wand, and basically this part took a little bit of time, but I eventually manually tracked every single keyframe until it all lined up with the wand and the live action movements. And to make it look more epic, I added a cloud displacement modifier to the actual beam. That way it'd look a lot closer to the movie than just a regular glowing cylinder. The next step for this shot was actually animating the beam to turn on. So what I did for that was use a cube as a shadow catcher, and then I animated it moving from one side of the screen to the other so it would slowly appear and give more of a cinematic feel. That is looking pretty good, I can't lie. Anyways, from here I just animated the noise to expand. That way it gives more of a feel that it's actually moving like through the beam rather than just standing still and, wobbling with the wand. But yeah, then I rendered out the sequence with a transparent background, and when that was finished, I threw it right into DaVinci Resolve where I could give it some compositing after I lined up the shots. I ended up adding multiple glow nodes to the Fusion page. I did this and tweaked all the settings to make it look just real enough, but as well fantasy enough to be a cool Harry Potter shot. That is already looking pretty cool, but it's missing one thing: light interaction on my face. So what I did was I added just a hotspot and I tracked it to my face, as well as a vignette for lens effects, and that was that shot completed. Now for the second angle, unfortunately I did have to motion track a little bit, but that's no problem as Blender has a really good motion tracker. So once I tracked the footage, I set it up in my scene, and I headed over to Mixamo to grab this knight 3D model. This is where I gave it a swimming, floating animation, and I just made it follow the wand in the scene to make it look like I was actually levitating it with my hand. I then put down a placeholder cylinder for later and headed into the knight model's textures, and what I did was I used a noise texture to drive an emission strength, and I would basically animate it to where his skin glows greener as the frame goes on to make it look like he's actually absorbing the energy from the wand. So I did the same thing as earlier and added a cloud noise to the cylinder. And then I decided it was probably a good idea to get working on the explosion, which was a really similar process to earlier, just in a slightly higher quality. So what I did was I dropped this right into Blender and then scaled it up and gave it a nice material to make it blend in and look like a magical explosion. Finally, I rendered out all the layers and then threw it right into DaVinci for a quick compositing process, similar to earlier's. And then after all that, here's the final 1 hour explosion. Finally, let's build the 1 day explosion. Since I had much more time for this project, I knew I had time to build a full 3D environment, so I wanted to make something like this shot. I got right into modeling the mountain with the ANT landscape add-on and then gave it these amazing textures. Then I added a ginormous cube to the entire scene to act as my fog and atmosphere. From here I went to fill out the rest of the environment, starting with duplicating the mountain and building a floor plane with some displacement, also built with the ANT landscape add-on. That's starting to look pretty good, so I went right ahead and threw in some clouds to actually sell the scale of the scene and show that the mountains were really massive. And when I say I added clouds, I added a lot of clouds. Since I had 1 day to make this scene, I had plenty of time to make a super high quality explosion. So I used 3 layers, the first one being like tubes shooting up, the second being the explosion itself, and the third being a nice shockwave. Once I was happy with the look that I had, I pressed simulate on a really high quality, which did definitely take some time, but the result is definitely worth it. In a separate Blender project, I brought in my mountain as well as the explosion so I could set up the simulation and the rigid body properly. And I eventually got a result that I was happy with, so I threw it right into my scene and then remembered that something was missing. It was the Death Star, so I brought that right into my scene and wanted to have it really, really high up in the air, as well as be super massive. That way we could really show the true scale of the environment. And honestly, it really worked well, so let's take a look at the base animation to see what we're working with. Not bad. That is much more like it. Everything was starting to look really good. That was until I actually looked up towards the Death Star. I realized that everything was just kind of empty, and it needed to be filled in with some more clouds. It was definitely noticeable in the render time how much these clouds truly affected the scene. However, I think it was worth it because they look really, really good. So then I just turned off Fast GI approximation to get better and more accurate lighting in the scene. Then it was time for a quick composite in DaVinci Resolve, and I think after all this work, it's finally time to look at all the videos together. So yeah, thanks for watching, and let me know what you think about it down in the comments, and I'll see you all in the next video.